Sinalakay ng isang paksyon ng Moron National Liberation Front o MNLF ang ilang barangay sa Zamboanga City kaninang madaling araw. 6 na ang patay.
May mga biyag din naman mga sibilyan ng mga rebelde. Daan-daan na rin ang napilitang lumikas. Ang gusto daw ng grupo ay maiwagayway nila ang matawat ng MNLF sa City Hall ng Zamboanga.
A month or so has passed since the beginning of the rebel insurgency in Zamboanga City. Thousands of lives were afflicted because of this crisis. The children of Zamboanga were not spared. With this, a question comes in mind. What is it like to be a child in war in Zamboanga? What Zamboanga is experiencing now is similar to that in the 1970s, when the MNLF Insurgency spilled over the city. Now, let's take a look at the perspective of a child who grew up in 1970 Zamboanga. Let's look into the eyes of Miss Criselda Yabes, a published writer and journalist, and recipient of the UP Centennial Literary Prize for Creative Nonfiction.
Dawned on me that, this story has been there for a long time. This war, this fighting, it started in the 1970s, and it is, I don't know if I can say, like coming to a full circle, like understanding it finally, or trying to make sense of the senselessness, or maybe at the end of it all, everything just seems senseless. We lived in a small house in a bungalow across the air base. And at that time, there was war going on in the Sulu archipelagos. But we didn't know a lot about it because this was martial law. And there was no press freedom. So we would only hear things through the grapevine. Refugees that were coming to the city. Of course, every day we would see the planes, flying in and out, helicopters. The buzz of it, the sound of it became very constant. And last night, my sister was telling me that when we were living there, our nanny, our yaya, would take her, for an afternoon stroll in the base. And would actually take her to the chapel, which is right next to the tarmac, where they had like a wake of the dead soldiers, the coffins were there. So the yaya would raise her and, show her, all these dead soldiers. It seemed like a normal thing. Can you imagine, you're growing up and then your yaya taking you there, to look at the dead soldiers, And also for me, I thought it was like an amusement park. Later on, it was different because it was a lot more dangerous. We were much more aware of it. We can't go to the movies because there'd be rumors of a bomb explosion or a bomb attack, or somebody's friend, or a classmate, or some family we knew was killed or kidnapped. It's that sort of thing. There were already threats of attacks and bombings, and I remember us having to rush home from school, and I remember some gunshots and hiding under the stairs with my sister. But at the same time, we didn't really have a bunker mentality. We also enjoyed ourselves, We went to the parks, we had boyfriends, we did normal things. So all these things were coexisting in one's psyche, when you grow up. And I think that explains a lot with me. Like now, as a journalist, I covered the military a lot, and some of the stories I covered in my early years as a journalist had to do with the war. Like I went to the Soviet Union when it fell. I went to Yugoslavia, when it was falling apart. And I sometimes would think there was never really a time that I felt scared. It's as if I was familiar with the sounds and the fear, that it doesn't affect me. It does affect me. I see it. But the kind of fear that other people would have isn't there because it's just been so much a part of me. I just felt basically all of us were kind of like growing up to be as normal as possible. And I could just sense that we all were affected in different ways. Like now when I talk to friends and classmates, some of them would say, I don't want my kids growing up in a place like that, or I don't want this and I don't want that, because of what they went through. They couldn't go out at night sometimes because of this. And the odd thing was, when I was there recently, I felt like I'm back to my childhood. This one's worse because I see it burning. It's the first time that Zamboanga was really vulnerable, because even though there's been like a spillover of the war from Holo, you've never really had this experience where the enemy is there at the gates, They've entered, they could actually take over. But I think maybe the difference is that I remember when I was growing up, there was very little, or maybe I should say there was a lot of intolerance. I mean, I could really see the difference between the Christians and the Muslims. The community was divided. When I was there last week, I went to the evacuation center. Their school was like just an awning, and there were more and more kids coming every day. So they had songs, they danced, they had recital, it just, and all the kids just seemed normal. But you know what I found really fascinating? The kids were still playing. They had time for that. But you don't feel like they were in shock, because they were still very creative. So creative that they didn't wait for anybody to be giving them toys. They were making their own toys. I think you need that. I think that's what you need, is to bring out their creativity, their potential to create things for themselves.
We've now seen what the war is in the eyes of a child who grew up in one. But let us look deeper at the effects of war-induced trauma on children of the war. Let us listen to Dr. June Pagaduan-Lopez, a distinguished professor at the Department of Psychiatry of the University of the Philippines, Manila, and a member of the United Nations Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment.
When you say trauma, you have to be clear. It's not like a person is already sick. I'd like to believe, based on my experience, any normal, psychologically healthy person will experience certain events which have the capacity to traumatize even the most normal. Kung hindi ka na-trauma ng isang bagay, hindi ka tao, hindi ka normal. Like rape. When you say traumatized, it doesn't mean that person has already lost her sanity, or that person has become so affected that she's become dysfunctional. That's not what it means, but rape has to alter certain things, like the way you feel, the way you think, the way you start to relate with others, and what meaning you give to the world after that. It has profound effects on 4 dimensions of our life. And I call this my ilog ng buhay, kasi the 4 dimensions of which I represent as 4 circles that overlap. So it's like a clover flower. In the Filipino context, kalooban. In other words, your inner world. The other dimension is what we decided to refer to as heart. The third dimension is kabuluhan. If this particular experience or event, how did it change the way you look at things, and what meaning did it give you? Now, the fourth dimension is Bayanihan, because we wanted to refer to one's sense of empowerment. In other words, trauma has all these capabilities of undermining your personhood. It could be temporary, it could be permanent. People can be traumatized in so many different ways. Emotional brain takes over. So when you try to recall, we have the word speechless. Trauma does something. And your type of recall of the traumatic event will be different from how you will recall something you studied, or something technical. You will not be able to recall it in chronological way and much less in a verbal way.
The recent insurgency in Zamboanga, however, was not without support efforts. One of which is the Bayanihan.
Bayanihan is the barangay peacekeeping operation. Ito yung mag-organize kita sa community based on the stakeholders. Like, i-organize mo sila into a group. Okay? Different sectors ng bawat community dapat meron. Ang gagawin lang nitong mga to is protektahan yung kanilang community. Yung sa Bayanihan, tayo mismo. Babantayan natin yung, sabi ko nga, babantayan natin yung community. Hindi natin iaasa sa police, hindi natin iaasa sa national government.
At ang diwa ng voluntarismo, buhay pa.
Major General Carlos Holganza says of the Bayanihan in Zamboanga that the military aims to win the peace by focusing on conducting civil-military operations, implementing developmental projects and programs. To quote, the military intends to end the problem, not with guns and bombs, but through Bayanihan. In other words, the Bayanihan emphasized the importance not of hunting down the insurgent enemies, but helping and protecting the citizens of Zamboanga, including the children. The Latin city of Asia, Zamboanga City, is definitely a beautiful city. And among all that makes the city beautiful are the children. As our national hero Jose Rizal puts it, they are the hope of our country. Hopefully, after the end of the insurgency, the children of war scarred by these recent happenings would gradually heal. There is hope for the hope of our nation after all.
Zamboanga, hermosa, preciosa, perlita, orgullo de Mindanao. Sus bellas dalagas son las que hermosas